What's up guys, my name is Ace, and yesterday afternoon we got a surprise weapon balancing update in Modern Warfare 2, so today we're going to be going into great detail and showing the before and after for everything that changed. And diving right into it, let's start it off with the RPK changes. Now, the first thing they did here is they increased the initial vertical recoil, and then they also increased the overall horizontal recoil. And when we look at the side-by-side right here, you can definitely see both of those coming into play. There's much more of a jump after that first shot fired, and then also when you look at the overall horizontal recoil, it's clearly got more. This may not look like a massive change by any means, and sure, the RPK is still going to be quite controllable, but having that jump after the first shot fired will definitely make those longer range gunfights a little more difficult. Now on top of that for the RPK, they have reduced some of the damage ranges, so our maximum damage range went from about 31 meters down to about 28 meters, so a little bit of a reduction there. The second damage range didn't change at all, it's still 35.5 meters. And then our last damage range drop-off used to be at 57 meters, and now it's at just over 52 meters. So nothing too major here, and generally speaking, the RPK should still be a very solid choice. Now let's move on to the Kastov 7.62, and with this one, we just saw a reduction to our damage ranges. And our maximum damage range is about the same, like it may have been reduced by about half a meter based on my testing, but really not too much to mention there. The second damage range and the third damage range though, these ones have dropped a noticeable amount, so we're just not going to be quite as effective at stretching out those longer range engagements. Next up in the patch notes, they mentioned the ISO Hemlock with 300 black ammunition is no longer hit scan. So apparently when it first came out, the bullet velocity wasn't actually working on that and it was working as hit scan. But then again, this attachment was bugged and nobody was able to unlock it anyway, so it's not like you'll actually notice a difference here. And now let's move on to the Fennec 45. And with this, we got yet another damage reduction, but this one only applies to the longest damage ranges. And with this, now with body shots, it's going to take at least 8 shots to kill instead of a potential 7 that we had pre-patch. And if you're hitting limb shots, it can now take you up to 9 shots to kill with this. Realistically speaking, you probably shouldn't be using this gun beyond 38 meters anyway, so as long as you're playing to the strengths of this gun, you won't notice any difference. I think this was mainly designed for Warzone. And speaking of Warzone, with the Fennec 45, another thing they've done is they've reduced the damage against armor. However, that's not something I test on this channel because I simply have zero interest in Warzone, so I don't have any pre-patch or post-patch values for you here. Now, let's move on to the battle rifle category, and there were quite a few little changes here to the battle rifles. Let's start this off with the FTAC Recon, and with this, the only thing they did on this one is they increased the sprint speed by quite a noticeable margin. It went from 5.88 meters per second all the way up to 6.1 meters per second, so that should be quite noticeable, and you should be able to get around the map that much faster with the FTAC. Then with the Lockman 7.62, they stated that they increased the damage range, but based on my testing in both semi-auto and full auto, I'm not seeing any difference here whatsoever, so I don't believe this applied properly. Then on top of that, they reduced our aim down sight speed, so they increased the time, and based on my hand testing here at 120 FPS, the new aim down sight time is roughly 255 milliseconds. It was a fairly minor change and you likely won't notice any difference here. And then on top of that, they increased our sprint speed from 5.83 meters per second up to 5.97 meters per second, which is quite a noticeable change. Now finally, they did mention that they reduced the hipfire spread minimum and they increased the hipfire spread while moving. I had a look at pre-patch versus post-patch for both of these, and again, it doesn't seem like this actually applied because it's identical pre-patch versus post-patch. So that's interesting to point out. It doesn't appear that there were any hipfire or range changes despite them being mentioned in the patch notes. Now let's move on to the SO14, and with this one, we got increased movement speed across the board. Our base movement speed was just slightly increased up to 4.55 meters per second. Our sprint movement speed, on the other hand, was massively boosted up to 6.22 meters per second. This is very fast actually for a battle rifle now. And it's worth noting, this is now faster than almost every single SMG in the game. The only SMGs that beat this in the sprint speed department are the Fennec and the MX-9. So that's pretty incredible, and this is definitely the biggest and most noticeable buff within this update. But then finally, they also noticeably improved our aim walking movement speed. As for the last battle rifle, this is the TAQ-V, and with this, we saw a bit of a damage reduction in both full auto and semi-auto. So let's start this off with full auto mode. All they did here is they reduced our close range damage values. However, in core game modes at 100 health, the only difference you would ever notice here is if you combine a base shot, so anywhere that's not upper torso, combined with a headshot. Previously, it would be a 2-shot kill. Now it's not going to be a 2-shot kill. However, if you had an upper torso and a headshot, it will still be a 2-shot kill. Outside of that, it's going to feel identical in core game modes, and it's still going to take the same number of shots to kill in all other situations. So this was clearly more so designed with armor in mind for Warzone. Now on the semi-auto front for the TAQ-V, it's the same story here. They reduced our close range damage values, but once again, in the vast majority of situations, you're never going to notice a difference here. It's still going to be that same 2 to 3 shot kill, and the only change that you'll notice at 100 health is previously, if you combined a limb shot with a lower torso shot, you could get a 2-shot kill, whereas now it will take you 3 shots to kill in that situation. But outside of that, at least for 100 health, it's going to feel exactly the same damage-wise. Additionally, with the TAQ-V, they reduced the damage range, and this applies to both semi-auto and full auto. They share the same damage range drop-off, so there's no point in showing it twice here. And as we can see, that final damage range drop-off went from 46 meters down to about 44.5 meters. Then, yet another change with the TAQ-V, they reduced our bullet velocity from 660 meters per second down to around 600 meters per second. Keep in mind that is hand tested, and hand testing can get a little bit messy when we're talking bullet velocity, but that's roughly where it stands now. And then finally for the TAQ-V, they reduced our movement speeds. And when it comes to this, our base movement speed was reduced by quite a noticeable margin down to 4.49 meters per second. Our sprint speed was also reduced by a very noticeable amount, down to 5.79 meters per second. However, our aim walking movement speeds were untouched here. It's still 2.30 meters per second, which is still quite fast for the battle rifle. It's only beat out by the FTAC Recon in this category still. But when it comes to that base and sprint movement speed, this is now going to be the slowest moving battle rifle in the category, and that is something to be aware of from now on. Now finally for the patch notes, with Incendiary Ammunition, after the Season 2 update, a new bug was introduced with Incendiary Ammo where there was no damage clamp on how much the burn damage would apply, and therefore guns that would deal, let's just say like 95 damage to the body before the incendiary burn effect took place, before Season 2, you wouldn't get enough additional burn damage to get a kill there, even though if you were dealing 85 damage, you would get like an extra 10 damage with that burn effect. So after the Season 2 updates, that clamp disappeared, and therefore you could now get a one-shot kill with a gun that deals like 90 or 95 damage, for instance. And with this update from yesterday, they fixed that bug. So we're back to where we were before Season 2. Incendiary ammo is generally useless to use in this game, unless of course you're trying to shoot down kill streaks, because it is still quite effective for that. And with that, that's going to wrap it up for all of the changes that took place with yesterday's weapon balance update. Overall, when it comes to the regular multiplayer experience outside of Warzone or DMZ, you're probably not going to notice too many big differences here. Unless you're an avid RPK user, you may notice that increase to the recoil. It may make it a bit more difficult to hit those longer range shots. And on top of that, you'll probably notice some differences with the movement speeds on the battle rifles, because there were some fairly significant changes to some of them, especially that SO14 sprint speed. That is very, very fast now, and it definitely makes that gun stand out in that particular area. Now with that, I'm curious to hear what you guys think about this weapon balancing in the comment section down below. Are you generally happy with these changes, not so happy, or just generally indifferent? Just let me know all of those thoughts down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.